Kirby Smart, I believe, went on the Paul Feinbaum show, and he was very vocal about people negatively recruiting against the SEC. Now, I'm not going to make you or waste your time. I'm not going to waste your time at all trying to get you to shed tears for the Southeastern Conference. I am talking about this for a couple of minutes tonight because I've witnessed it. And so I have some firsthand knowledge here. Firstly, what Kirby Smart alleged on that show this week, I can confidently tell you happens. I have spoken to kids myself who have echoed the same to me. This happens. What is this? I'll tell you in just a second. But I've heard it from players themselves. So I don't just echo Kirby Smart here. I'm telling you firsthand. I've seen this happen. Here's what Kirby Smart said on the Paul Feinbaum show this week. He's talking about programs negatively recruiting against the SEC. That's not the way NFL GMs are looking at it. That's not the way the NFL coaches are looking at it. This is Kirby Smart talking. They want to take kids that want to compete at the highest level. They want to go and play in those big-time matchups, and that's what kids want. They want to go play in the biggest games, biggest pieces. That is what they aspire to do. So for a coach in another conference to sell, hey, it might be an easier path to come here and go this way, it just speaks volumes. All right, what do we think about this? I'll tell you what I think. This works on some kids. I don't knock a kid for going anywhere he wants to for his reasons. You go to Oregon, Southern Cal, Georgia, Clemson. I don't care where you go. It's your life. It's not, even if I did care, who cares that I care? It's your decision. It's not mine. But I can tell you that this works on some kids. There are some kids who are drawn, maybe they grew up in the South, maybe they want to go to an SEC program, and someone gets in their ear. Recruiting is all about planting seeds. It is all about harvesting. Everyone's trying to plant their seeds, and you hope that the topsoil is not only fertile, but it is a very advantageous situation for your seed to grow specifically. And if you plant seeds in someone's mind that you're going to get beat to death in this conference, and hey, you can still compete for championships here and maybe have a lot easier road, sometimes that manifests itself into you getting a really good player. Now, I can tell you this. The great programs don't have to do this. The great ones get you to come play for them because of them. The second tier types and the tier B and tier C recruiters, in other words, the ones that can't sell their program, then they have to pull the other guy out of their back pocket. And if I can't land you with our merit, then I'm just going to negatively recruit against whoever it is we're going up against and hope to win you by default. Lesser of two evils here. I've never really been a big fan of that approach. I've never really been a big fan of coaches who feel the need to have to use that approach. Not mentioning anyone specifically here for a very specific reason. Let's continue. I can tell you this, and this is why I don't think it bothers folks like Smart and Saban and whoever else feels like they've been affected by this. It bothers them in a way. Yeah, it's never fun to lose a kid. But I can tell you this. I've had coaches tell me, in the long run, it benefits us sometimes that this does happen. This is not even exclusive to the SEC. Expand it out. You don't think Clemson occasionally loses out on a kid because their depth chart is used against them negatively? You don't think that Oklahoma or Ohio State or Penn State, you don't think they ever occasionally lose out on a kid because someone comes in and says, you may not start there for a little while? You know, there are different pitches that can be used negatively against you. Kirby Smart's just telling you, hey, I'm in the SEC. We've had some coaches tell kids, boy, it's a brutal path in the SEC. Why don't you come here? You can still achieve the same thing, but not risk injury as much. Just telling you there are different ways to go about it. But ultimately, ask yourself this. If you're recruiting like Ohio State right now, for example, just take Ryan Day. Ohio State may land the best class of all time. Ryan Day's recruiting, and they're in it for a kid. And let's say someone comes along, maybe not necessarily in the top 5 conversation every year, but maybe a fringe top 20 type program, and they tell a kid, you could go to Ohio State, but if you come here, you're virtually guaranteed to start. If that appeals to a kid, and that is in the seesaw battle that is a recruitment, the straw that tips the edge in your opponent's favor, ultimately sometimes it's a natural filtration process when you consider what it takes to start at Ohio State. It takes sort of a dog's mentality to start at Ohio State. To ever crack the 2 deep at a place like Columbus, Ohio, or Tuscaloosa, or Clemson, South Carolina, to ever start for those programs, you got to be the best of the best on planet Earth, physically and mentally. Because there are a lot of guys, these programs don't recruit them if they don't have the physical tools that could eventually be molded into elite physical skill. But if you're C plus from the neck up, if you're soft, if you're constantly looking for the shortcut, a lot of times these programs will tell you, if we lose out on you on the recruiting trail, it's a lot easier to find out then than 2 years into your tenure here when you're taking up a roster spot and we know you're never going to be able to contribute. So a lot of times these programs lose these big-time recruitments because of those kinds of pitches, and it ultimately ends up being a good thing for them. But what does it say about your program if you have to use those tactics? Because I'll tell you this, I don't care, you run your program how you want to, but you have to choose a lane. Because sure as I'm sitting here, the same folks who Kirby Smart's talking about here, who I can tell you are out there, who pitch kids on the recruiting trail and say, don't go there, man. The schedule's brutal. You risk injury. Come here. It's not nearly as cannibalistic. Our schedule's not nearly the grind that theirs is, and you can still make it to the NFL. You can play for a national championship. You can either say that, or at the end of the year, you can tout your strength of schedule. You can't do both. You can't recruit against SEC teams in the offseason and say, come here, it's easier, and then go through the regular season, get to playoff selection time, and go on TV and try and talk about how tough your schedule was. You can't do both of those. And right now, we may have some people that are trying to do that, the best that I'll say. You can't also, by the way, the other thing that we get thrown at us a lot, SEC bias, and I told you last week, we absolutely have it on this show for a reason. Same reason those NFL general managers had SEC bias this last week. Same reason you have SEC bias. We get the TV ratings every Monday morning. Everyone's got it because they're the best. That's it. Same reason I was biased for USC in 2002, 2003, 2004, because they were the best at the time. My bias flows where the elite action is. So right now it's in the SEC. But SEC bias, nevertheless, is thrown out all the time. You can't claim SEC bias every weekend, but then go out on the recruiting trail and tell kids, the SEC's too good, man. You go down there, you got to play good players every week. You got to play good teams every week. You may never get to play for a college football playoff spot or a national championship. Come here. Road's a lot easier. We'll still develop you, blah, 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 yada, 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 but you don't have to take as much risk. Well, you are knocking down your own SEC bias argument because you just portrayed it right there in your recruiting pitch. Got to pick a lane. One way or the other, can't have it both ways.